Sarah Howard is a senior academic advisor in the Central Support for Academic Advising Office at The Ohio State University, responsible for developing training and professional development opportunities for more than 250 professional advisors across 6 campuses and for managing 2 substitute or float pool advisors for a pilot project. She works remotely even prior to the global pandemic for Ohio State from over 700 miles away from the Columbus campus. Prior to this role, Sarah advised undecided exploring students and students pursuing STEM majors for over 10 years at Ohio State and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She earned a BA in English and a BS in mathematics from Ashland University and completed her MA in college student personnel from Bowling Green State University. Within NACADA, Sarah has served as chair of the Technology and Advising Community, appointed member and chair of the Technology Advisory Board, appointed member of the Webinar Advisory Board and Publications Advisory Board, steering committee member for the Advising Communities Division, and mentor for the Emerging Leaders Program. As a co founder of the Academic Advising Chat on Twitter, Sarah believes strongly in the relational power of technology and social media. Mrs. Howard has contributed conference presentations about technology and training related subjects at regional and annual NACADA conferences throughout the past decade and is co authoring a chapter about technology and training for the upcoming 3rd edition of the NACADA Advisor Training and Development book. Aside from her job duties and NACADA roles, Sarah enjoys adventuring and exploring the outdoors with her husband and 3 children. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we're delighted to get the opportunity to chat to you. And as Matt has outlined in your impressive bio, we will have lots to chat about today, I'm certain. But one of the things we like to do, Sarah, is to give our listeners the opportunity to kind of get to know you a little bit, and that'll happen throughout the course of the interview. But we always like to begin with what Kevin Thomas dubbed the origin story. So we'd love to hear about, how you found yourself working in academic advising and found yourself working where you are today.
Sure, I'd love to share that. Education has always been kind of in my path. When I had the opportunity in middle and high school to do any career shadowing or career exploration opportunities, I would shadow people like my elementary music teacher or a middle school guidance counselor that I knew, or my junior year in high school, I had an opportunity to do a year-long internship with a teacher. And so when I got to college, I was headed down that path. I thought I was going to teach middle school math. And in the state of Ohio, you choose 2 licensure areas for middle grades. So I picked English and mathematics because those were subjects that I enjoyed. What I found in my first semester classes is that I was not so much interested in spending all of my time learning about pedagogy and learning how to use the tools of technology for teaching. And so I switched my major to English and math. I figured I like these subjects. I'll continue to learn about them. But my thought at the time was, I'll just get my master's degree and teaching certification after graduation. So fast forward, I was super involved in orientation. I worked in our college writing center. I was involved in some religious life organizations, other student groups, a leadership living learning program. You could find me in my junior year here, there, and everywhere, in addition to taking more credit hours than I should have any given semester. But I started talking with the woman who coordinated orientation on our campus and came to realize that while education wasn't necessarily what I thought I wanted to do anymore, I didn't see myself in that classroom setting. Higher education was actually an opportunity. And it's one of those situations, I'm sure a lot of advisors have this experience, that you don't really know about the field of advising until you're in college. Like, people don't grow up being like, I want to be an academic advisor. I mean, maybe eventually they'll meet cool people like us and they'll want to do that. But for most folks, that's just not the case. And so I started exploring graduate programs at the beginning of my senior year. I applied to several within the state of Ohio. And found myself going to Bowling Green State University. My graduate assistantship was in an office working with undecided students, and I had just some fantastic supervisors and mentors in that office who really gave me a firm foundation in why students need advising, what it's like to work with undecided or exploratory students. I had a really diverse caseload of students who had varied experiences from what I had seen at my small private liberal arts school. And so I really just fell in love with the problem solving, the life teaching aspect of advising. And so I knew when I was approaching graduation that advising was primarily the place that I was going to be job searching. And after a long search that felt like it never was going to end, I did finally end up with an offer for a position at the University of North Carolina. So packed up and moved there, and had some great colleagues and a lot of great learning experiences in that first position. After a few years there, decided to move back closer to family. I'm from Central Ohio, and so started applying for other positions and found myself back at the one of the regional campuses of Ohio State. Ohio State, contrary to most people's understanding, is not just the main football hub in Central Ohio. There are actually 5 different smaller campuses spread throughout the state that really serve as the open access kind of arm of the institution. And so I worked at one of those smaller campuses about 40 miles east of the Columbus campus, where students typically spend a year or maybe 2. We do offer completion of some of the 4-year degrees at those regional campuses, but a lot of those students then transition to Columbus campus. And that just provides a whole nother set of transitions and connections to resources. So that was a great opportunity to learn and grow. Had an opportunity to join a team with the undecided and exploratory unit. Those students are near and dear to my heart, and so I jumped at the chance. It was a really rock star kind of team. I had some great colleagues there. And then when my family was presented with an opportunity to move to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I tossed a pie in the sky idea at my supervisor and said, I know there's all these projects related to advising. They were working to centralize some of the initial training and onboarding process for new advisors. And she got funding and approval for a part-time position. So I work 20 hours a week from very far away from the Columbus campus. And it's great. I get to interact with all those people that I had developed relationships when I was on campus. But I also get to really kind of make a big impact on the way that we're setting the tone for the advising community at our campus, as well as making sure that advisors are equipped with the tools and the trainings and the opportunities that they need to be happy, successful professionals who can really make an impact for students.
Yeah, well, I'm already learning already because I didn't know there was the multiple campuses. I thought it was just the one. But I'm glad that you talked about problem solving, being a problem solver, and life teaching. Because yeah, I mean that definitely defines being an academic advisor. And now that you are in this position, you were actually in this remote position even before the global pandemic, and so I'm sure you had others reaching out to you when the pandemic was becoming more real, in the sense of like, we might actually be working remote for the foreseeable future. What kind of advice were you able to give during that time, with people like shifting gears at working remote and still trying to help their students?
Sure. So I remember I woke up on Monday, March 9th, and was watching some national news broadcast. They were showing a clip of all of the institutions across the country that had already announced that they would be transitioning to remote school for at least a period of time. And I saw my institution on the list, and it was like, oh, I must have missed an email late last night. I woke up, I kind of got myself going. I knew we had an academic advising chat scheduled on Twitter that Tuesday afternoon. And so, what we decided to do, kind of in taking the lead from some of the teaching folks who had started a Google document, we started a Google Doc about advising during times of disruption. And within that next kind of 48 hours, that link was shared thousands of times. We had, like, at any one given time, people couldn't even get on the document to add anything because there were just so many people trying to view it. But we were providing guidance about, how do you make sure that you have all the tools that you need? the laptop, the the processor, the webcam, this, that, and the other. What tools are available for cloud-based saving of documents? If you're kind of packing up for this disaster that we all knew was coming within a couple of days, how do we kind of quickly transition? So we started out with very like tangible things. Here's the technology things you need to consider. Here are things related to addressing student needs. But then we also started thinking about, well, what if this goes on for longer than just the couple of weeks that most institutions were planning at the time? So we started thinking about, well, what about end of term processing? Is there going to be an additional way to think about petitions? This was a big disruption in everyone's life, so we kind of anticipated, would you be expecting more petitions to come in? How do you plan for graduation clearance and students who might be taking incompletes because they were just so disrupted? What about orientation, like what already exists in these online spaces? So we really use that document to start the conversation for thousands of advisors across, I don't even know how many campuses, both in the US and abroad. And it was wild. I never in my life thought that that document would get that much traction, but the number of people who reached out directly to me and just said, thank you so much. This has been really helpful. Like, my administration isn't thinking about any of these things. And so just at least having a starting point has been really great. It's just, I was glad to have been in that position, to have kind of already gone through that transition myself 18 months prior when we moved, and then to be in the position to be forward thinking and kind of in a non-reactive space for my own self, which allowed other people to be reactive in the ways that they needed to be to make that transition. I don't know that before that kind of March 10th, March 13th timeframe that anybody would have thought that advising could be done solely remotely. I know that there were pockets here and there, at some online institutions, but the resiliency of advising communities across the world and just the tools that have been available to make advisors accessible really has, I think, been a great benefit to students everywhere this year.
Absolutely. I think resiliency is a great word, but I mean, that document is incredibly comprehensive and offers kind of just almost a step-by-step guide. So whatever they were kind of along their planning process, they were able to get something from it. And I suppose I'm interested, Sarah, in even taking you back a little bit further in terms of your kind of interest in kind of technology, social media, and utilizing that in an advising space. Where did, maybe it even goes back further to just your interest in social media and technology, where did that come about, like, and how did you decide to utilize it in terms of advising?
Sure. So I would say Facebook came about when I was a senior in college. So it was this new novel thing. And as I was entering graduate school, it was a way in which I was able to keep it in touch with some of my friends, my extended family who lived out of state. Twitter then kind of came shortly there on the heels. And I was in my first professional role when Twitter kind of was unveiled. I joined Twitter sometime in April of like 2009, roughly. So I've been on Twitter for a super long time, but I started following people that were really were working in higher education in various roles. And eventually, there were some of us who were interested in advising who kind of found each other in this space. And we started experimenting with the academic advising hashtag, which at the time when Twitter was only 140 characters, when you're typing out academic advising, that takes up a whole lot of space. So we pretty quickly worked to narrow that down and started using hashtag ACADV, so for short for academic advising. And at the 2010 conference in NACADA conference in Orlando, Florida, several of us ahead of that who had met on Twitter said, hey, I'm going to the conference. Are you going to the conference? You're going to the conference too. So we arranged the first ever NACADA tweet up. There were 10 of us who gathered in a small little bar area in one of the hotels. And it was the first time that we had really met one another in person. It seems super weird that you would get all these people together. It's like, okay, fine, technology is kind of related here. Um, but what I found as an introvert, I had been to an Akata conference when I was a graduate student, and I was so overwhelmed because there were so many people, there were so many sessions. I still was figuring out what is an advisor and is this what I want to do. Um, and so then for me to return to an Akata conference, having this already set group of people who I kind of already knew just felt so much more comfortable. I didn't have to make the small talk. I didn't have to be like, so how are the sessions that you went to today? Like I already knew a little bit about their lives. I knew about their work situations. I knew about these people. And it just was great to be able to kind of start the conversation at point step three, I guess, rather than starting all the way at step zero or step one. And from that, we started having more conversations about wouldn't it be great if we could continue these conversations um, beyond the conference. So for me, technology was not just, oh, I'm on Twitter for Twitter's sake. It was about the relationships that I was able to build with colleagues who understood the work that I was doing, but had different perspectives and different contexts to be able to support or challenge or provide different ideas to me. And so we started the Academic Advising Twitter chat. It was Tuesday evenings, I believe, around 8 o'clock Central Time. And every week we would meet online. We would have these conversations. We had a rotating group of moderators. And surprisingly, 10 years later, we are still doing this Twitter chat. And people have come and gone. We've rotated through a variety of sets of moderators as people have moved into corporate roles or at different institutions where maybe they don't have enough as much flexibility with their daily schedule. But it's been a great way to invite others into the conversation, to provide a sounding board for people who maybe don't have a lot of colleagues who really understand their work at their own institution, who maybe are looking for different ideas about how they might try something. It's a great resource. And then when we get together at conferences, it's like, oh, how have things been? And you can just catch up, and it's not like you haven't seen one another in 11 and a half months. It's this conversation just keeps going, and it's all facilitated through technology.
Yeah, and you were mentioning how, you came with the question of, well, wouldn't it be great if? And sometimes people ask that question and it ends with that question. And you've been able to kind of run with it and, a decade later and it's still going, which is really amazing.
I have to shout out Laura Pasquini for that because she's like, so she was very involved in Nakata at the time, and she was like a major go-getter. And that was something that she's like, yes, let's do this. And so she kind of got the ball rolling and kept the energy up and just brought on a great team of folks. So it's been it wouldn't necessarily have moved much further past the what if Laura wasn't behind that. But she's also who pulled me in to get involved in Nakata in the first place. She was the chair of the technology commission at the time and said, hey, we need some steering committee members. I think you would be great. Come on board. And so, I mean, I owe a lot to her, her mentorship, her friendship, and just her attitude to just try stuff, get it off the ground, just try it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And maybe we'll go with that because you're talking about someone that was a mentor to you, and you've actually been able to also in Akata be part of the Emerging Leaders Program as a mentor. Talk to us about your decision to be part of that, and who was your mentee.
Sure. Um, I will say that I was an ELP reject at first. I applied as a mentee myself in about 2012, I believe it was. And I recall distinctly getting an email message from Lee Cunningham after I'd submitted my materials. And she said, Sarah, thank you so much I mean, Lee is just so wonderful, but thank you so much for applying. Um, I really feel like you have more experience already in Nakata, and the mentee role just isn't necessarily right for you. And I just felt like, oh no, what am I gonna, like, I had applied for this, I put together all my materials. And so then about 2 years later, longer than that. In 2017, I had applied to be a mentor, kind of at Lee's nudging again. Like she said, you've had all these other experiences. I really think it would be great to add you as a mentor. And I had a lot of doubt from that experience because I was like, couple years ago I had more than enough experience to be a mentee, but now you're saying that I have enough experience to be a mentor. Like, how does this? But it was fine. My mentee, the person I was paired with, was Dominique Carter from North Carolina State University. We really hit it off. Our styles really worked well together. She's got a great counseling background and is working on her PhD in counseling. And so we had a lot of great conversations about supporting students in crisis, helping support students who maybe are kind of flagged from an academic standpoint because they're not performing well. And how do you support them? And she has some experience working at some other institutions and with student athletes that really kind of was beneficial for me to learn about as well. So yeah, we had a great 2 years. We didn't get to celebrate the conclusion of our class in Puerto Rico, which is the one disappointment that I share from the ELP program. But it was a great program, and even the other people in our 2018 to 2020 class, it was great to get to know a lot of them too, both the other mentors and the emerging leaders.
Yeah, and I think perseverance there in terms of, it all worked out. And look at you, you didn't end up being a mentee, but being a fantastic mentor. And whilst Puerto Rico didn't happen in person, but it was a great kind of online experience, Cincinnati is coming up annual this year, and you have a number of presentations. Could you give us maybe a sneak peek or a preview about what you'll be presenting on at the upcoming annual?
Sure. Absolutely. So one of the topics that I will be presenting on, I actually had done the same presentation at the Region 3 and 5 Regional Conference in April. It's about being prepared for emergency and disaster response. So kind of drawing on my experience in developing this kind of comprehensive document at the beginning of the pandemic. I have worked in a number of positions and at two very large institutions where things happen, whether that's on an individual level, whether that's being a weather emergency, whether that is a campus crisis. And so I kind of put together my thoughts about that. And now is really a great time for folks to be thinking about how are they prepared to respond in a crisis or an emergency. We're all getting back to kind of a new normal. And so we're thinking about being in our spaces in different ways. We're thinking about the people that we're around in different ways, I think. And so giving folks an opportunity and some of the tools to start thinking through how are they onboarding folks new to their advising roles, or even just folks who've been in advising roles for a while. How are they prepared to handle some of those campus emergencies? A second presentation is a partnership with John Sauter from Niagara University. John and I have worked very closely together over the past 6 years or so in matters relating to technology. So in 2017, at the annual conference where the NACADA core competencies were rolled out, we did a hot topic session introducing and kind of diving a little bit deeper into the technology competence area. And so we're reprising that. It's almost the 5-year anniversary of the NACADA core competencies. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about how do you train on technology competence? What does that look like? How has that changed as technology has changed in the past 5 years? And more to come on that because we haven't honestly had very much time to touch base and plan that out. But I'm excited again for a continued collaboration with John because he and I work very well together. Where he has the big ideas, I can make them happen. And where I have like a narrow experience, he usually can flesh that out. So that's been great. And the last session that I'll be presenting is on how to write a conference proposal. So I have not only over a decade of experience in presenting at NACADA conferences, mostly annual, but I also have read conference proposals since 2008. And so I have a lot of experience kind of seeing what I have viewed as really strong proposals where people tend to kind of fall flat or just have some missteps in that proposal process. So we're going to demystify that, give an opportunity for anyone to contribute their ideas to those conference sessions, and make them feel confident and equipped to submit, hopefully, for the upcoming regional conferences, and then also to see some of those at annual next year.
Yeah, the conference proposal one, I mean, all of them sound very interesting, but I think that one in particular, I would have loved to have gone to when I first started as an advisor, because when I was going to conferences, it was like, can I write one of these? And then it's, well, how do I write one? And that first one,
Right.
writing that first one was like the toughest because I had nothing to go off of.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. You sit in some of these sessions and you're like, oh, we're doing this cool thing. It might be about a totally different topic, but you start to think like, oh wow, we're doing this too. I could probably contribute something. I could talk about our program for 25, 30 minutes and then answer questions. But getting over that fear of like, oh no, what is an abstract? How should my abstract be different from my proposal? Do I have to provide resources? What does it mean when it's asking for data? Like, and so you kind of can get into this whirlwind, and then the timing, you have to submit. I mean, the call for proposals for annual conference opens in December, right after the annual conference has really just ended, and so the time to just think through and put your ideas on paper and decide, should I tackle this topic solo? Could I put together a panel of people who might share different perspectives from different institutions? I just hope to give people a place to start thinking about that, creating some connections, and just continuing to amplify the voices of a variety of people within our organization.
And I think one of the things, I mean, your approach, I think, is fantastic in that, like, it's like, what are some of the areas that I can really make a difference in helping others where you are, that getting the peek behind the curtain. Like, once you demystify it, it becomes, it's kind of like, oh, that's how it works. But until you get that, it is like the Wizard of Oz. You don't know. And I know, Matt mentioned in your bio, one of your kind of current roles is around training and development for advisors. I'm interested, I suppose, your approach there. Like, how do you begin to assess the needs, and like how do you begin to set out how you're going to put those training programs together, Sarah?
Sure. So honestly, initially, when I began in my role, um, the thought initially was that I would be developing a series of training modules for advisors in the undecided and exploratory unit. That was kind of the unit I was still attached to. We'd had a series of turnovers in our undecided program. And because of that, it always takes a lot of time to onboard a new person. And depending on when someone is starting, you can't always be there 100% giving them face-to-face time. And so we were trying to figure out a way to balance the needs of the advisors who wanted to provide the in-person trainings, as well as just the fact that there's a lot of information to learn. At a place like Ohio State, there's over 200 possible majors, and you're learning the curriculum for all of those. As an exploratory advisor, you have to understand the different nuances between colleges and departments, the different policies, the procedures, how things are done at different campuses, what is the campus change process? Like, it just goes on and on. And so there were so many pieces of information where it's like, let's start to boil this down to what advisors need to know initially, and then we can start looking to see, after they get through that initial training period, what can we provide kind of next? So most of what I'm doing with training right now is through our learning management system. So they're asynchronous online modules. Some of them are readings, some of them are videos. There's a whole section on just introducing what is advising as far as NACADA is concerned, the core competencies, the value statements, thinking about FERPA. Since we are a U.S. institution, we need to make sure that our advisors have a good understanding there. We dive into, how do you develop rapport with students who might be different than you or have different experiences than you, especially when you're working within a 30-minute time frame of an advising appointment. And then starting to develop just some handy resources or kind of a one-stop place where advisors can go when they're like, oh, how do I do that one transaction in our student information system that I only have to know about once every semester, but I forget where it is. So that's kind of where it all started. And then as we've continued to onboard folks in a virtual environment over the past year and a half, more of those needs kind of come up in conversation. We have advising administrators contacting us saying, hey, could you provide a training about this, that, or the other? And so we usually try to add some asynchronous content in support of those in-person or kind of synchronous trainings. So that's kind of how we've started. It's still kind of a pilot project to have this online kind of centralized training support. But the feedback that we've gotten, even from more seasoned advisors, they're like, oh, I wish we would have had something like this when I started. It would have been great to know that I could just go on to the learning management system and find all this information. So we've gotten really positive feedback in that regard. And I think it also helps set the tone for just what we expect from the advising community at Ohio State. Even though each of the colleges kind of have their own personality, it's helpful to know that all 250 plus advisors and anybody that we're bringing on new really has this understanding of what is our mission and our vision through advising at Ohio State, and how can they be the best professionals serving their students in the best way possible.
Kind of goes back to utilizing the technology. I mean, you're able to do this over 6 campuses with over 250 advisors. And one of the other things that you're managing is to substitute float advisors for a pilot project. So what are full advisors?
Sure. Um, so my boss, Amy Treboni, is just fantastic. I'll give her a shout out. Dr. Amy Treboni, she just finished her EDD in the spring. And so she had this idea several years ago. At Ohio State, when there are 250 plus advisors, there are vacancies pretty regularly. People are on medical leave, perhaps family leave, or they've taken a new opportunity either at the institution or somewhere else. And anytime somebody is not in the office, there's a break in the service that's provided to those students. Either that they have to wait longer to get in to see a different advisor who's filling in, or those advisors are taxed and you kind of get into that burnout situation because they're carrying 2 caseloads, for instance. And so Amy had this great idea. Could we create this team of advisors who are trained across all the institution? And she used to be the director of the exploration advising office, and so that was kind of her MO. But could we create this team that was available to be deployed when needed to fill in these gaps? And so last fall, we got funding, partly through the CARES Act. And we're able to move forward with actually implementing this project. So in November, we had 4 new folks hired to join our team. And it has been fantastic, both from an institutional standpoint and also for them as professionals. We've covered so many more appointments. Students don't have to wait as long when they are working with a unit that has a vacancy. And for these particular advisors, they're centrally trained. They know about all the majors at the institution, but then they also get to see kind of the day-to-day work for 2 to 3 months in some of these places that they're helping out. Our regional campuses do tend to be under-resourced, and particularly in this COVID year, there have been a lot of vacancies for advisor positions and a lot of retirements from our regional campuses. And so because everyone's virtual, it doesn't matter where in the state you're advising from, or out of state in my case, but you can still have appointments with these students and help support these teams that really need some additional advising support. So overall, we're not quite a year in, but we'd say this pilot is definitely a success so far. We'd love to continue to be able to fund these positions. Right now, they're just funded for 3 years, but we're hoping to be able to extend that longer. But really, at the end of the day, it's about that continuity of service to our students, making sure that their needs can be met, that we can support the advisors across our institution, and we're giving a really great opportunity for our team to learn more about all these different places across campus.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a great pilot project, and potentially maybe this is a new presentation in a year or two's time.
That yes, we've talked about that. The one of the people that I directly supervise doesn't have a lot of conference presentation experience, and so I'm like, hey, this is something we could do. We could write this up, and you could talk about your experience and how others could consider implementing something like this. So
Yeah,
look for it coming up.
well, it would make a lot of sense. And perhaps this question kind of maybe builds on that a little bit. But I suppose I'm just interested in somebody, who has been working remotely prior to the pandemic, then, saw kind of what other people maybe learned. Now we're seeing people kind of transition back to campus somewhat. We're still obviously in that phase of a little bit of uncertainty. I'm just wondering, like, how you see, it's worked so well for you, in terms of learn, like, if there are people out there that are kind of like would like to be in a position maybe, or like to consider, not going back to campus full time, or taking a somewhat different approach, just in terms of leaving the pandemic aside, and maybe the emergency and all that went on, any insights you would offer to people just in terms of remote working when not in a pandemic?
Sure. I will preface my answer by saying there was a lot of thought and reasoning behind once I knew that a position had been approved. I We were very intentional, my spouse and I, about thinking about the life that we wanted to have when we moved. Um, when I lived in Columbus, I had a 30-minute commute both directions. We were worried about childcare pickups and drop offs. Um, I was pregnant at the time that we moved, so we knew that we were adding a third child to our family. We were going to be new in a community that is very well established, where a lot of people have grown up here their entire lives. We ourselves were, 700, 800 miles away from our immediate family support network. And so, through a lot of reflection, I decided to kind of slow down a little bit in terms of my work. Do I like working full time? Absolutely. Am I passionate about supporting students and advisors? Absolutely. But for the sake of my family, for my own health, for our transitions, it just really was important for me to kind of slow that down a little bit. And so the opportunity to advocate for myself in that time and say, here's what would really be great if we can make this work. Um, and to move into a part-time position where I can still support the network that I've built over time, but also be here to support my family, to get my kids on and off the bus, to have my almost 3-year-old home with me during the days, and take him to the park when I don't have meetings and things like that. All of that wasn't something that I would have anticipated prior to kind of April of 2018, when this whole thing was becoming more real. I think a lot of people during the pandemic also had similar realizations that cutting out really long commutes, that being able to spend more time with family, even if it meant that it just was a FaceTime call or a phone call, um, those are the things that are really important in life, right? Like, we could all, the institution is never going to care about its individuals as much as we care about the job that we have, right? And so we can do the best that we can in the roles that we have, but we also need to be our best selves in our own lives. And so I think sometimes we advisors are really empathetic and caring people. And so we can experience secondary trauma from being so involved in our students' lives and being so connected to the work that we do. That's part of what drew me to advising, is that I could leave at 5 o'clock and I can leave student files on my desk locked, or on on my locked computer screen. Um, there weren't going to be any middle of the night kind of emergencies that I had to respond to off duty. Um, and I think we all just need to kind of think about how are we living our lives, and what's going to work the best. I know a lot of places 40 hours is still standard full-time work. Is there a way to be flexible with any of that? Can you have a day where you can work from home every once in a while? If you have an appointment, rather than rushing back to the office, could you finish your day at your home office, for instance? I think there's a lot of ways that we can support people to be their best authentic selves and not burn everybody out. I think higher education in general is kind of coming to that reckoning point. I have a feeling after the pandemic, there will be a lot of turnover. Just people are really tired. And if we don't give people the time to heal and just be their best selves, then we can't support our students in the way that they need supported.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpackage with that answer. I mean, for one, I think of the scene from Jerry Maguire where Jerry gets fired from the company he's working at, and then he's going to the elevator. And he's like, "Let's see how they do without us." Elevator doors close, and then the work keeps going. You know,
Exactly.
and and I
Exactly.
think too, like you're saying in terms of the pandemic, I think a lot of people have rethought, what am I doing? Do I have this balance? Is this what I want to do? I mean, I've had colleagues that have left higher ed completely over this last year because they gave so much to it, but they're like, I need to close this chapter and go somewhere else and do something else.
Mhm.
So yeah, a lot of changes I think are going to be happening, and I remember seeing a tweet you did where you were writing about that, in terms of how, like, you have the difference in the distance working options, and that there could be that amount of advisory professionals that leave because of burnout. And I think at there's the one thing I read that said, when we first start in a job, like, this job is an extension of us, and we can still have like work, personal life, everything else we want to do. But at some point, we become an extension of the job. And then everything we do then revolves around the job. And then that's where you end up having that burnout. And like, I don't see any freedom happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have some very informal mentors or just even casual conversations with people. I remember sitting next to Maureen Schaefer from the University of Iowa. Just we happened to get into a conversation and she mentioned, oh, yeah, I was a stay at home parent for a while. And then I returned full time to higher ed, and it was the best decision that I ever could have made. And I think the US workforce really glorifies busyness and like this thought that like you have to do everything 100%. You can't do everything 100%. There's going to be some balance issues. There's going to be, burnout. There's going to be just tiredness, mental health concerns, etc. And sometimes you just need to be honest and authentic with yourself and say, like, this is not the right time for X, Y, or Z. Um, Column, you had mentioned kind of the perseverance and applying again for the ELP program. If you talked with Ashley Thomas in the NACADA executive office, she would say the same thing about me as in my journey to becoming an author with NACADA. And I applied for something, didn't get it, applied again for something else, didn't get it, and then finally was given an opportunity to co-author a paper or a chapter for an upcoming book. I think you have to know when is the right time to go towards something, when it's going to be beneficial to you or to the field of advising or to your family or to anything that's really important to you. But I also think you need to know when to say no. So I've turned down some opportunities as well because it's just not the right time. That would add too much to my plate. It would put me out of balance. And so even just those little conversations of people saying, oh, yeah, like that was my journey. I've turned out okay. You can still, if you desire to be an administrator and advising, like that's still an opportunity for you, even if you're not working 40 hours a week for the first 25 years of your career. So I stay curious. I still am learning a lot of things, and pursuing a lot of other professional opportunities. But I'm just doing it part time, and I feel more balanced for that right now.
I think that's really important for people to hear. And I think that that's the distinction between perseverance, where you want something, but perseverance doesn't necessarily mean, you say yes to everything that comes along. It's about, that intentionality and looking at it and seeing what's best for you. I think you put that really well in terms of looking at, the holistic picture and what it has to work for you, not just your institution. It has to work for you and your life. And I think there have been a lot of learnings in this chat. I think we could continue on, and there'd be lots more to come. But for our listeners, Sarah, who want to learn more about you or interested in getting in touch, is there a way that they can do that?
Absolutely. On Twitter, I'm Howard SJ, HOWARD SJ. Feel free to follow me, message me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. Facebook. I know there's a whole bajillion Sarah Howards in the world, but if you're connected with other Nakata people, I may be connected to them, so you can find me there. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody who wants to reach out. I love having conversations with folks about, advising and all sorts of other semi-related or non-related topics. So would be happy to connect with any listeners.
Well, I think all that remains at this point is to say thank you for offering so many wonderful insights today. Matt and I appreciate you taking the time to chat to us.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it. It was fun.